Yes, news for Scotland. Hello, I'm Hugh Stewart, and this is our last podcast of 2023. So, for week ending December 22nd, I'm going to begin with some Scotland's quick news this week, then we're going to move on to a feature. Thanks for listening. It's news where we are. And I'm going to start this week on the economy. This is Budget Week in Scotland, of course, and focusing first on a new report by the Fraser of Allender Institute, who runs Strathclyde University. This report highlights the problem facing the Scottish Government, how to pay for popular measures like the child payment without the means of increasing the Scottish Government's income. The Scotland Act of 2016 devolved more powers to the Scottish Parliament, but these are mainly about increasing spending without some of the methods which governments normally use to pay for those services. Out of all the taxes collected in Scotland, only a few are devolved. In recent years, the Scottish Government has taken over responsibility for certain benefits, such as disability payments, and introduced new measures not found in the rest of the UK, such as the Scottish child payment. As the Scottish Government aims to make it easier for people to claim these benefits, spending on these looks like increasing over the years, but income from a UK Government's Barnett formula will not always rise to meet these extra needs. Under Barnett, if, say, an additional 100 million is spent in England, then Scotland's share would be population-weighted, something like 9 million. If, however, a Scottish benefit is not available south of the border, then funds have to be reallocated within Scotland's fixed budget. Devolved social security currently takes up about 10% of Scotland's budget compared to 7.5% back in the year 2017-18, and with costs now about 4.1 billion. The trend has been to grow at about 7% a year. At the moment, there's two main reasons for this extra cost. One is inflation. Benefits this year increased by 10.1% due to the UK Government's official inflation figures released in September 22. For this year, the figure would be an extra 6.7% based on the inflation figures announced in the UK's autumn statement a couple of months ago. But the other reason why it's getting more expensive to run Scotland is because the Scottish Government wants to use social spending to fight poverty. The Scottish child payment, for example, according to one estimate, could lift 50,000 children out of poverty, as eligible families can claim £25 a week for children below 16. This will increase spending by 216 million. The biggest increase in spending will come from the two benefits gradually being taken over by the Scottish Government. Those are the Adult Disability Payment and the Personal Independence Payment. Spending will increase by 642 million. The Scottish Fiscal Commission expects the friendlier approach of the Scottish Government will see a big increase in people claiming, from around 420,000 people this year to an estimated 660,000 cases by the year 2028-29. This could lead to a higher spending of 223 million by the end of this decade. Some of that might be met by the Barnett funding in a perverse kind of way, because if continuing health service problems south of the border lead to more people being unfit for work, that means spending on them will have to increase south of the border too. That's what economists call perverse. Scotland's friendly approach is costing an extra 400 million this year, roughly rounded up, above what comes from UK funding. Next year that gap will be around 800 million, and by the end of this decade, at that rate, it could reach 1.4 billion of extra spending, all to be funded from within the Scottish Government's resources. Focusing again on the budget, we have a contract with the people, according to the Scottish Government. Well, the 2024-25 Scottish Government begins its journey through Parliament this week, introduced by Deputy First Minister Ms Robison, who is also Scotland's Finance Secretary. This budget, she said, will outline the Scottish Government's financial priorities for 24-25, including the difficult choices which have to be made as a result of last month's UK autumn statement. The Deputy First Minister has described that statement as the worst-case scenario for Scotland, telling Parliament that it failed to provide the investment needed in services and infrastructure, reflecting the UK's economic circumstances after Brexit. The budget will provide the funding to protect people and public services from the worst effects of these economic circumstances, Ms Robison said, arguing that Scotland faces a deeply challenging financial situation. But in spite of that, her budget will reaffirm the Scottish Government's social contract with the people of Scotland. She said the autumn statement was devastating for Scotland's finances. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, the NfS, has acknowledged that it will lead to planned real-term cuts in public service spending. Scotland is facing a 9.8% cut to our capital budget for infrastructure between now and year 27-28. The £10.8 million additional health consequences we received from the autumn statement for next year are enough to run NHS Scotland for 5 hours. And UK government funding for justice, housing, communities, net zero energy and environment are all being cut in real terms. All this comes on top of more than a decade of UK government underinvestment that, she said, has left our public services with very little resilience. And Ms Robison continued, "We refuse to follow the UK government spending decisions. Indeed, we are doing all we can to mitigate them. We are proud that Scotland has a social contract which ensures people are protected by a safety net should they fall in hard times. And this contract underpins the budget with targeted funding to protect people and public services." She says, "We are unashamedly targeting resources at those most in need. To support them through the cost of living crisis, we are providing funding to deliver the services that people rely on most, along with a 10-year programme of public service reform. And we're using all the powers we have to create a thriving economy while providing the funding to achieve our ambitious net zero target." The timetable is the budget is introduced to the Parliament this week and then gets debated in detail at the end of January into the start of February. So we at News for Scotland will bring you the detail and analysis of that debate as it proceeds in the new year. OK, let's move on to another topic, asylum seekers' right to work, another area that's reserved to UK. Allowing asylum seekers the chance to work could help them settle into communities better while boosting Scotland's economy and workforce. Research by the Scottish Government's independent expert advisory group on migration and population sets out how enabling asylum seekers to gain employment could improve health and well-being and reduce the risk of exploitation. Changes could also benefit the Scottish economy, help fill gaps in the workforce, and see an increased council tax paid directly to local authorities who have agreed to host asylum seekers. The report will underpin proposals for a Scottish asylum right to work pilot, which is being prepared by the Scottish Government but has to be submitted for consideration to the Home Office, and that will go through next year. Migration Minister Ms Robison said, "Scotland provides a welcoming home to many people seeking asylum, with policies underpinned by dignity, respect and compassion. This independent report shows how enabling asylum seekers to find work could reduce anxiety and improve the well-being of vulnerable people while supporting Scotland's economy by helping to fill skill shortages and addressing population challenges." She said the Scottish Government will now use this report to design a proposal to work within the current devolution settlement, but only independence would give us the power to implement a full Scottish asylum system rooted in respect for human rights. The chair of the Scottish Government's independent expert advisory group on migration and population, Rebecca Kay, said there was strong international evidence that restrictions on the right to work have a negative effect for asylum seekers' material and emotional well-being and for long-term integration into the community. She said wider measures to provide adequate reception, settlement and integration services will be required in order to realise the full benefits of a right to work policy for asylum seekers. The UK Government policy, which Scotland has no legal say on, currently means that asylum seekers in all parts of the UK have to wait 12 months before being able to apply for permission to work from the Home Office, and that's only on a restricted roll of jobs on the shortage occupation list. Now let's look at anti-trade union laws. Another area which the Scottish Parliament has no say over is employment law. A few months ago, the UK Parliament passed a law which restricts the right to strike. The Strikes Minimum Service Levels Act was passed last July in London without the backing of the Scottish or Welsh governments. The Sewell Convention stated that UK legislation would normally require the consent of the devolved parliaments of the UK, but that doesn't always happen. Here's a part of the debate last week in the Scottish Parliament, led by Neil Gray, the Airdrie MSP, who speaks for the Scottish Government on fair work.
Support for the Scottish Government's continued opposition to the Strikes Minimum Level Services Act and any associated secondary legislation. These are challenging times. In the aftermath of Brexit, COVID-19, the war in Ukraine and the cost crisis, topped off by Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget last year. So we now confront some of the most formidable economic conditions in living memory. These times call for us to share our vision of how we face these challenges head-on, while providing clarity on how we will seek to build a better future. This Government's vision is for an economy that is fair, is green and is growing. A country that provides a promising future for every worker, their families and communities, supported by a robust labour market. The Scottish Parliament is limited in what it can do, but we will continue to do all we can to resist this Act. Today's debate is a testament to that, where we hope to secure Parliament's support for our position. Trade unions stand as a cornerstone of Scottish democracy, playing a pivotal role in realising our Fair Work ambitions as we successfully transition to net zero. These ambitions in turn form the bedrock of a wellbeing economy, providing workers with better job quality, pay, economic security and work-life balance, and employers an available workforce with the right skills aligned to the needs of businesses and our economy. The STUC represents around 540,000 trade unionists and members of 39 affiliated trade unions and 20 trades union councils. It can speak for the interests of female workers, black workers, young workers and those who suffer discrimination not just in the workplace but also as part of civil society. To genuinely foster an inclusive society with well-being at its heart, a strong economy, a goal I believe most members of this chamber share, these voices are invaluable in development of economic and social policies. Only recently, the First Minister and I held a biannual meeting with the STUC and their affiliates where the issue of minimum service levels was raised. Alongside the First Minister, I made a commitment to do everything in our power to resist the implementation of the Strikes Act. Back in 2016...
Mr Gray sat down to take a friendly intervention from a Labour MP for Edinburgh South, Daniel Johnson.
By all means.
Daniel Johnson.
I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving. He's quite right. At the heart of this is the role of the trade unions in representing workers. But actually, is there not much more a fundamental principle, that of the relationship between worker and their work and their right to withdraw their labour when all they have to exchange is their labour itself?
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And I think that's a principle Daniel Johnson and I share, which is why I hope we can secure Labour support for the motion that we have before us this evening.
Change shows the Scottish Government's attitude of partnership with the trade unions is one shared between the SNP and the Labour opposition. Later on in the debate, Murdo Fraser for the Scottish Conservatives wondered why the Scottish Government was allowing time for this debate at all, as it refers to matters out with our Parliament's powers. The Labour Party has a problem here, though. It has long been the SNP's policy to devolve employment law to Scotland, but this is opposed by Sir Keir Starmer's UK Labour, although the Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar does support that move. Next story now, new powers to tax second homes in Scotland. Scotland's councils could raise extra funding if they charge up to double the full rate of council tax on second homes. This comes in new powers agreed by the Scottish Parliament. Councils will be able to increase the charges from the 1st of April 2024, with the rates for the first year being based on those from this existing financial year. A second home is classed as any home that is not used as someone's primary address, but is occupied for at least 25 days in a year. Latest figures show that at the end of September 22, there were over 24,000 second homes in Scotland. Second homes are subject to a default 50% discount on council tax. However, local councils can vary council tax charges, and the majority already do charge second homeowners the full amount of the council tax, which is the maximum currently allowed. But this change brings second homes into line with council tax policy on long-term empties and aims to increase housing availability by encouraging more homes to be used for actually living in. New owners of properties that have previously been empty for more than 12 months will now have a 6-month grace period during which they will not have to pay the double council tax, and councils can extend that period if there is evidence that renovation or repairs are being carried out by the owner with a view to bringing the house back into use. Public Finance Minister Tom Arthur said, "I'm pleased Parliament has backed this important legislation. These changes to council tax were a commitment made in our programme for government and aim to make sure the tax system works as an incentive to prioritise homes for living in." He said a majority of those who responded to our consultation earlier this year supported councils being able to charge a council tax premium on top of the regular rates for second homes. By protecting those renovating an empty home from paying the full premium, we are incentivising new ownership and giving them time to organise the work necessary to bring it back into use. Councillor Katie Hagman of Coslar, that's the overall body which represents Scottish local councils, said, "I'm delighted that this important legislation has now been given parliamentary approval. Coslar very much welcomes the ability for councils to take decisions to increase the premium on second homes in their areas." Now, just before I hand over to Joe Murray, I'd like to have a word with you, our listeners. We've been making these podcasts since the end of October this year and are now starting to get some information on you. I emphasise this is anonymous information. We just know roughly where people are. We don't have any personal information on you. Not surprisingly, 94% of our listeners are in the UK, and that breaks down to, of them, 62% in Scotland, 34% in England, and just over 3% in Wales. Last week, we picked up a few listeners in America, from California through Nebraska to Virginia. Canada is also represented by Ontario and Prince Edward Island. We also have a couple of listeners in Japan, a few in Spain, Ireland, Belgium, Austria and the Netherlands. The majority of our listeners found us on Google Chrome, that's 42%. Also 35% use Safari, 8% on the app of our hosts, Podbean, and also 5% found us on Spotify. We also have a growing subscriber list on our YouTube edition. Most of you started following us just in the last 3 weeks, so we're pleased in News for Scotland that our small and classy audience is beginning to grow. And you can help. All you need to do is to tell others about us, spread our stories out on your social media, please. You can grow with us, and the team here all intend to make NfS a recognised part of Scotland's news media. I wonder where we'll be when I read this out this time next year. Newspapers in Scotland continue to decline. BBC Scotland is losing audience, but we are growing. So where are we going to be this time next year? So from me, Hugh, Stuart and the team, Jeanette, Joe and Yvonne, thanks for being in at the start of Scotland's fastest growing new media service. We will take a break until the new year. There won't be a podcast next week unless something big happens like peace breaking out. But for this show at least, I'll hand over to Joe Murray.
Thanks, Hugh. Half of our news team have taken the way of the swallow and have flown south to warmer climes. Hugh in Spain, and Yvonne has gone so far south, if she keeps going, she'll be heading north again. I hope the jet lag is worn off and you're enjoying Australia, Yvonne. But not the two other hardy reporters. Me and Jeanette have been ordered to stay and get this week's edition online. So we're weathering the cold and wet, just for you. It's coming on Christmas, they're cutting down trees, putting up reindeer, and we really need to be singing more songs of peace. All of us at News for Scotland wholeheartedly support a proper ceasefire and end to atrocity in Palestine. How many deaths are too much? A wee thing popped into my inbox the other day. It said Palestine gas fields, Marine 1 and Marine 2 in the Mediterranean are worth $500 billion, and everyone is after a piece of them. I decided to check, and lo, there are 2 gas fields close to the Egyptian sector and a tiny cordoned off piece of sea off the Gazan coast. These fields together hold 1 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and yes, that is $500 billion worth. Israel has claimed to many other much larger fields. The maps of the area are all a bit fuzzy on Google, so I looked at some geological ones, and again, lo, these were well worth looking at more closely. Some of Israel's fields, if the maritime allocation was correct, are in the Palestinian area occupied by Israel. Moving the maritime border to claim a field from Lebanon notwithstanding, if we include Israel's area of occupation, 2 fields larger than the marine fields, Noah and Mari, likely belong to Palestine. If you look further back to May 1948 when Israel was created inside the borders of another state, I reckon Palestine could lay claim to parts of even larger fields in the Israel quarter. We could go back further, but we'll leave it there as that was the legally defined borders in 1948. So, through occupation, Israel appears to have laid claim to very large amounts of Palestinian natural resource in the Mediterranean, as well as water and other rights to natural resources on land. This is always an excuse for invasion and occupation anywhere in the murky world of politics, business and finance. Staying on the murky world of politics, News for Scotland wish health and freedom to our journalist colleague Julian Assange, who remains rotting in a Belmarsh dungeon, for revealing truths that need to be told. Julian should be freed unconditionally and returned to his family. I'm retired now, and as a former card-holding NUJ journalist, I cannot understand why so many members of that great union remain quiet on a fellow journalist's imprisonment for doing the same job as they do. One journalist oppression is every other journalist's suppression. Merry Christmas from me, Hugh, Jeanette and Yvonne. We hope everything you would wish for yourselves and your family in 2024 comes your way. Oh, and it would please us no end if you would click the subscribe button. This will be our last show of 2023, and our esteemed producer has asked me to finish it with a rerun of my article on hydrogen as an alternative fuel to replace carbon sources. So here it is again. Thank you, see you in January. This is Joe Murray for News for Scotland, talking on the environment. In a previous feature I spoke about global warming and climate change. In that feature I asked that we change how we live to prevent an ecological crisis for the sake of our children and grandchildren's future. Fossil fuels have driven and powered our societies and our economies for a few centuries now, and it has not been to the benefit of our environment. In order to be sustainable, we need to consider all of these three things together. So how can we change how we live without destroying our economy? We are told economy is central to society, that it is the most important thing, while our environment is continually paid scant attention. This is the way we look at things these days, and sustainability too often means affordability. These are not the same thing. Far from it. Without a healthy environment, societies will diminish. Our experience and history tells us that. And without society, any idea of economy is meaningless. So it's pretty poor business practice to destroy the very thing that provides you with every gulp of air you breathe, every drop of water you drink, every morsel of food you eat, and every single penny you earn. It all comes from nature, from the environment we diminish. An old Cree Indian prophecy says, only when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish has been caught, and the last stream poisoned, will we realise we cannot eat money. So how do we get our economies away from the damaging hydrocarbons that are wreaking so much damage in our environment? There is much talk right now of replacing fossil fuels with hydrogen, that switching to cleaner hydrogen energy in several sectors can meaningfully support the transition to a net zero future. Hydrogen can offer a clean energy solution to parts of the economy that are difficult to decarbonise, such as industrial processes, industrial and domestic heat and hard to electrify transport, such as heavy-duty vehicles, or ships, or aeroplanes for that matter. Although it is the most abundant element in the universe, hydrogen must be produced by separating it from other elements in water and fossil fuels. While producing it requires energy, the hydrogen itself is emission-free at the point of use. So let us investigate how hydrogen as a fuel source is produced. Hydrogen is a very small and light molecule, meaning the element's natural form is a gas. As a gas it can be liquefied, but that requires keeping it at a temperature of minus 254 degrees C, which makes it very difficult and expensive to transport, particularly over long distances. The solution lay in converting the hydrogen into a chemical compound which is already widely traded around the world, ammonia. Ammonia is produced in a process where the hydrogen is mixed with nitrogen and together processed at high temperature and pressure. Some things you might like to know about hydrogen. 1. Hydrogen comes in many colours. Why does an invisible gas have so many colours? Well, it comes down to the different sources and the way hydrogen is produced. Some processes create more greenhouse gas emissions than others, so scientists have attributed colours to distinguish the difference. The primary ones being grey hydrogen. This is generated from natural gas, or methane, through a process called steam reforming. However, for every 1 tonne of hydrogen created, the grey hydrogen method produces 10 tonnes of CO2. Most of today's hydrogen in use is grey. Blue hydrogen. During the steam reforming process, a high proportion of carbon generated is captured and stored underground. But the capture is another energy-intensive process. Blue hydrogen is classified as low-carbon hydrogen. The process for green hydrogen is powered by electricity from renewable resources to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. Green hydrogen is classified as carbon-free hydrogen. The prospects for hydrogen looks good because it can be used in several sectors. Its most likely uses are as a clean chemical feedstock for energy source in certain hard-to-abate sectors. There are also lots of ways to produce it. Now, as it becomes more widely used, costs will inevitably come down. To achieve net zero, renewables will have to provide a greater share of global electricity. However, renewable energy production fluctuates depending on the weather. In this context, any excess electricity could be used to produce green hydrogen, which then becomes a form of renewable energy storage. Hydrogen is versatile because it can be used as a fuel source in several sectors and can be compressed into gas or liquefied to make it easier and cheaper to transport. Currently, most hydrogen is used in chemical plants or refineries, and it is grey. If this were replaced with blue, or even better, green hydrogen, it would cut carbon emissions significantly. Hydrogen also offers a solution for net zero home heating. While electrification has received government policy boost in the UK, electric heat pumps may not suit all properties. Hydrogen could be a solution depending on location, cost and availability of supply. In future, it may be simpler and easier to replace a gas boiler with a hydrogen-ready one. Hydrogen has a role to play in transport too, especially in hard-to-electrify segments, such as heavy-duty freight, trains and buses on certain routes. ferries and ocean-going shipping. However, it could be decades before any hydrogen-fuelled aeroplanes are spotted in the sky. We are seeing the beginnings of an emerging worldwide hydrogen market. Strong government support and ambitious decarbonisation policies make the European hydrogen market the fastest growing and potentially the largest. But some of the biggest projects that have been announced recently are in parts of Asia, North Africa and the Middle East. The UK hydrogen market development is progressing at pace. These will enjoy government support to produce blue hydrogen at a scale to create a market. Over time, green hydrogen energy is expected to replace blue hydrogen. The immediate challenge is how to scale up production of hydrogen as an energy source and bring down the price. To do this, low-carbon hydrogen must move up the policy agenda to catalyse investment in infrastructure and create a competitive market. According to the Hydrogen Council, in a net zero world, demand for clean, renewable and low-carbon hydrogen could increase from 90 million tonnes today to 660 million metric tonnes in 2050, making up 22% of the final energy demand globally. But how can hydrogen support our journey to net zero? We need to look to decarbonising transport. Transport is responsible for about a third of the UK's carbon emissions. Whilst it is possible to power smaller vehicles such as cars and vans using electric batteries, larger vehicles such as trucks, buses and trains are much harder to decarbonise using batteries due to the size and weight of the batteries required to power something so large. Instead, it is possible to decarbonise them using a technology called hydrogen fuel cell. That uses hydrogen as its power source. Powering these vehicles with renewable hydrogen makes them truly zero carbon. Renewable hydrogen can also be used to decarbonise shipping and aviation. Here in Scotland, inspired by the Green Fuels for Denmark project, Edinburgh Airport, in partnership with a Danish company Ørsted, has begun plans to make Edinburgh Airport one of the most sustainable in the world, mapping out a route for the airport to meet its goal to reach net zero by 2040. This, of course, will play a crucial role in achieving Scotland's net zero ambitions by 2045. Edinburgh Airport will make use of green technologies, including new hydrogen fuels produced at scale from offshore wind farms, to eliminate carbon emissions from the airport and the aircraft that operate from it. This includes its service vehicles. So, hydrogen fuel, especially green hydrogen, points the way to a possible cleaner and healthier environment. But let's not relax and celebrate yet. This is just one of the many things we need to do, or stop doing, if we are to reverse all the damage we are doing and to restore natural balance to the planet. So until next time, thanks for listening. I'll now hand you back to Hugh in the studio.
And that's it for this week. So remember, if you want to get in contact with News for Scotland, we have the email address info@newsforscotland.org. We'd like to hear from you. If you're watching YouTube edition, leave a comment underneath. And you can also get through to us on Facebook. Let's hear what you think we need to be talking about on NfS's news, where we are. All the best. I'm Hugh Stewart. Bye.